The grand dining hall of Sheikh Zahir Al-Rahman glittered with chandeliers of crystal and tables set with gold-plated cutlery. Guests from across the Gulf sat in their finest silks and tailored suits, their laughter bouncing off the marble walls. At the far end, near the servants' corridor, stood Amina, the palace maid. Her dark skin and humble uniform made her invisible to most, but not tonight. Tonight, she was the target. One of the Sheikh's wealthy guests sneered as Amina walked past with a tray of dishes. "Tell me, Sheikh," he chuckled loud enough for everyone to hear, "do your servants know anything beyond scrubbing floors? Or is that all they're good for?" Laughter erupted around the table. Another guest added, "Perhaps she can serve us tea, but surely not wisdom." Even Layla, the Sheikh's spoiled daughter, smirked and rolled her eyes. "Father, really? Must we keep such people? They don't belong in a palace of knowledge." Amina froze for a moment, the tray heavy in her hands. She lowered her eyes, swallowing the sting of humiliation. She had endured insults before, but the cruelty tonight cut deeper. Just then, one of the palace scholars, seated among the guests, scribbled something furiously on parchment. He turned the paper around, revealing an equation so complex it looked like a maze of numbers and symbols. "Here," he boasted, "this riddle of calculation has silenced even the brightest minds in our circle. None have solved it. Certainly not a maid." The guests laughed again, their mocking eyes all turning toward Amina. But to their surprise, Amina didn't shrink away. She placed the tray down calmly, stepped closer, and looked at the parchment. Her lips moved silently as her eyes scanned the tangled equation. And then, without hesitation, she asked for a piece of chalk. The hall fell into stunned silence. A hush blanketed the dining hall as Amina, the invisible maid, stepped toward the great chalkboard at the end of the room. Servants froze in the doorway, too stunned to move. Guests leaned back in disbelief, their jeweled rings glittering as they pointed and whispered. Layla, the Sheikh's daughter, scoffed. "This is absurd. Father, tell her to return to the kitchen. She'll embarrass herself." But Sheikh Zahir, curious, raised a hand to silence his daughter. His sharp eyes narrowed on Amina. "Let her try." Gasps rippled. No one dared defy the Sheikh's word. Amina took the chalk, her hand steady, her posture tall despite the whispers clawing at her back. She studied the web of symbols, the twisted fractions, the strange integration signs. For others, it was chaos. But for her, it was music. Lines of logic unfolded in her mind like the rhythm of a song her grandmother once hummed in the dark nights of her childhood. Slowly she began to write, step by step, symbol by symbol. The guests, who at first sneered, now leaned forward. The scholars exchanged worried glances. Layla's smirk faded, replaced by the first flicker of unease. Finally, with a firm stroke, Amina circled the answer. Not a guess, not a mistake, a flawless solution. She set the chalk down quietly, then turned back to face the hall. The silence was so deep that even the chandeliers seemed to stop trembling. One of the scholars shot up from his seat, eyes wide. Impossible. That equation was unsolved for years. How could she? Another professor rushed forward, scanning her work. His voice cracked in awe. She's right. Every line. Perfect. All eyes darted to Sheikh Zahir, the mighty billionaire who had built empires and silenced rivals, now sat frozen. His gaze locked on the maid who had just humbled his circle of intellectuals. And in that silence, Amina's voice finally rose. Knowledge does not choose palaces or uniforms. It lives where it is nurtured. The hall gasped. The servant had spoken like a queen. The echo of Amina's words still hung in the air, cutting deeper than any insult could. Guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to clap in awe or stay silent in fear of the sheikh. But Layla, the sheikh's daughter, could not bear it. Her pride, built on years of being untouchable, burned like fire in her veins. She slammed her jeweled hand against the table. "Enough," she roared, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare a maid lecture us in our own palace? Do you think solving one riddle makes you equal to me?" Gasps filled the room, but Layla wasn't finished. She rose, her gown flowing like a storm behind her, her eyes blazing with venom. "Tell the maid," she sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. Tell them where you sleep at night. Tell them about the broken shack you call a home. Tell them how your hands reek of bleach and soap. Is this the woman who dares to stand before my father's guests as if she belongs?" The laughter started again, crueler this time. Guests covered their mouths, smirking at the humiliation. Even some of the guards looked down to hide their chuckles. Amina's throat tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. She could feel the weight of every stare pressing against her skin. Layla stepped closer, towering over her. "You're nothing but a black maid, a shadow, and shadows vanish when the lights of wealth shine." The words were poison, meant to crush, but Amina's eyes lifted, calm, unshaken, steady like a flame that refused to die. Her silence was louder than Layla's screams, and that silence made even the sheikh himself shift uneasily in his chair. Layla's laughter still echoed, sharp and cruel, but Amina did not flinch. She inhaled slowly, her gaze sweeping across the hall, from the mocking guests to the silent guards, and finally to Sheikh Zahir himself. Her voice, when it came, was calm but heavy with truth. "Yes, I do scrub floors. Yes, my hands smell of soap. And yes, I sleep in a shack smaller than your dressing room. All of this is true." The guests chuckled again, nodding smugly. Layla smirked, triumphant. But Amina raised her chin higher. "What you don't know," she continued, her voice cutting through the laughter, "is that before I wore this uniform, before I entered these palace gates, I studied under one of the greatest mathematicians in North Africa. My mother worked 3 jobs just so I could attend classes. I solved equations not to impress nobles, but to survive hunger. Numbers were my escape from despair, and knowledge was the only wealth my family ever owned." The laughter died. Guests shifted uneasily. Amina's eyes glistened, but her voice grew stronger. "When my mother died, debts swallowed everything. The scholarships ended, the books were sold to pay for bread, and so, I became what I had to be, a maid." The hall was frozen. Layla's smirk faltered, her hand tightening on her jeweled bracelet. "But even as I scrubbed these marble floors," Amina said, her gaze piercing Layla's, "I never forgot what my mother taught me. Wisdom carries its own crown, even when the world refuses to see it." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the chandeliers seemed dimmer, as if bowing their light toward her. Sheikh Zahir leaned forward, his expression unreadable. His guests, once mocking, now avoided her eyes. For the first time in her life, Layla felt the weight of being the smaller one in the room. The hall was heavy with silence, the kind that made every heartbeat sound louder. Sheikh Zahir, who had sat like a carved statue through the mockery and the revelation, finally leaned forward, his dark, commanding eyes fixed on Amina. For years, those eyes had silenced ministers, broken rivals, and humbled princes. Tonight, they studied the maid who had just shaken his palace to its core. "You," his voice rumbled, deep and steady, "were trained in mathematics?" Amina bowed her head slightly. "Yes, Sheikh, until life demanded otherwise." The guests stirred, whispering, but one glance from the sheikh silenced them instantly. He turned back to Amina. "And you solved a riddle my scholars have wrestled with for years, while carrying trays in your hands?" "Yes," she answered simply. The sheikh's lips pressed into a line. His gaze shifted to the parchment still on the board, then to the scholars sitting stiffly, shame crawling up their necks. Finally, his eyes landed on his daughter. "Layla," he said sharply. She jumped at the sound of his voice. "Yes, father? Do you see this woman?" He pointed at Amina, his tone stern. "Do you see her strength, her discipline, her dignity?" Layla's throat tightened. She tried to answer, but her pride choked her. "She wears no jewels," Zahir continued, his voice echoing across the marble hall. "She commands no titles, yet with a single stroke of chalk, she has humbled every man and woman here. Even me." The guests gasped. A billionaire sheikh admitting humility was unthinkable. Zahir's hand gripped the armrest of his chair. His eyes softened, though his voice remained strong. "Long ago, my own father told me, respect those who carry wisdom, no matter the clothes on their back, for someday the world may kneel before them." He turned to Amina fully now. "You remind me of him." The hall trembled with the weight of those words. Layla's proud mask shattered. She had never seen her father speak this way to anyone, not even kings, and in that moment she realized the maid she mocked might be the very mirror of her own downfall. The silence in the palace stretched like a tight rope. Layla's face burned crimson, not from shame alone but from the sting of being overshadowed in front of her father's most powerful guests. Her diamond bracelet clinked as she stood abruptly, the sound sharp in the hall. "Father," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury, "this maid may have solved a trick of numbers, but do not mistake her for more than what she is." A hush swept through the crowd. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, sensing drama. She continued, her eyes fixed on Amina with icy disdain. "Anyone can memorize formulas. Anyone can stumble on an answer. But intelligence," she tapped her temple, "true intelligence is tested in challenges beyond the classroom." The sheikh's brows furrowed. "Layla," but she raised a hand, her voice sharp and commanding. "If she is so wise, let her face a challenge of strategy. A challenge fit not for servants but for rulers." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some whispered that Layla had gone too far. Others eagerly waited for the spectacle. Amina, calm as ever, set down her tray. Her gaze met Layla's, not with fear, but with quiet strength. "And what would this challenge be?" Layla's lips curved in a cold smile. "A game of wit, one my tutors taught me since childhood. If she loses, she leaves this palace tonight, and never dares to raise her eyes to those above her again." The sheikh's jaw tightened. His voice boomed, "Layla, enough." But Amina spoke before he could continue. "I accept." Every head turned. The lunch lady, mocked, insulted, underestimated, stood tall against the fury of a princess. The hall crackled with anticipation. Layla sneered. "Then prepare yourself, maid, because this time no trick of chalk will save you." And with those words, the stage was set. The daughter's pride against the servant's strength. Layla's heels clicked against the marble as she strode toward the center of the hall. Servants hurried to clear space, moving tables aside, sensing this was no ordinary confrontation. The guests leaned in, eyes wide with anticipation. Layla lifted her chin, her jeweled necklace glittering under the golden chandeliers. "This is a game of Mansuba," she declared, her voice ringing with pride. "An ancient strategy puzzle, one that even seasoned players of chess find impossible. It is not a game of chance, but of foresight, calculation, and control. It separates rulers from servants." Gasps spread across the room. Mansuba was legendary. More than just a chess riddle, it was a test used by generals and kings for centuries. Many scholars had failed to solve its trick. Layla smirked at Amina. "You claim wisdom? Then show us. Solve this in front of my father's court. If you falter even once, everyone will see you for what you are. An imposter, hiding behind luck." A servant rushed forward, placing a carved ivory chessboard on a velvet stand in the middle of the hall. The pieces, inlaid with gold and obsidian, gleamed like silent witnesses. The sheikh frowned deeply. "Layla, this is not a test of character, it is a spectacle of pride." But his daughter pressed on. "Father, if she is truly worthy, then let her prove it. If not, she should return to the kitchens where she belongs." All eyes turned to Amina. She stood still, her hands folded calmly in front of her apron. There was no fear in her face, only a quiet fire that unsettled even those who mocked her moments ago. Finally she spoke, "Very well. Set the board. Let everyone see not who I am, but what truth pride cannot hide." Her voice, steady and clear, echoed across the hall. The guests erupted in murmurs. Some were thrilled, some horrified, and the sheikh. He sat back slowly in his throne, his expression unreadable. For the first time that night, it was not clear who would win, princess or maid. The ivory chessboard gleamed under the chandeliers as the servants carefully arranged the pieces into the legendary Mansuba position. A formation so tricky, even seasoned strategists had been baffled by it for centuries. Layla leaned back with a smirk, folding her arms as if the outcome was already sealed. "This puzzle has humiliated ministers, generals, and men twice your age," she sneered. "Do you really think a lunch maid can do what they could not?" Amina stepped forward, her hands steady, her gaze fixed on the board. She didn't answer Layla. Instead, she studied the pieces in silence. The hall grew tense. Every eye was locked on her. The clinking of goblets ceased. Even the guards at the door craned their necks to see. Minutes passed. A bead of sweat rolled down one scholar's forehead, though he wasn't even playing. Finally, Amina reached out. With calm precision, she moved the first piece. Gasps echoed. Layla's smile faltered. "Beginner's luck," she muttered under her breath. But Amina wasn't finished. Her fingers flowed across the board, shifting pieces with an elegance that seemed almost rehearsed. Every move was bold, decisive, and perfectly aligned with the hidden solution. The scholars in the crowd leaned forward, their eyes widening. One of them whispered hoarsely, She's solving it." Layla's fists clenched at her sides. Her confidence wavered as she saw the impossible unfold before her eyes. Amina placed the final piece down with a soft click. Then, without hesitation, she stepped back. "It is done," she said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. The air seemed to freeze. Then one of the oldest scholars in the hall staggered to his feet, his voice trembling. "By Allah, she has done it. She has solved the unsolvable." The crowd erupted. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Some clapped their hands over their mouths. Others muttered prayers under their breath. And on his throne, Sheikh Zahir's eyes shone, not with anger, but with something far deeper: pride, respect, awe. But Layla? Her face drained of color. For the first time, the princess stood frozen. Watching the maid she mocked turn the entire hall against her arrogance. Layla's chest heaved as the hall erupted with whispers and applause. Every clap of admiration for Amina felt like a dagger twisting into her pride. Her fists trembled, her nails digging into her palms so hard they nearly drew blood. "No, no!" she burst out, her voice shrill. "This is a trick. She must have known the answer beforehand. Someone must have told her." But her desperate cries only deepened the humiliation. The scholars shook their heads, the nobles exchanged glances of pity, and even the guards looked away from her tantrum. Sheikh Zahir rose slowly from his throne, his towering frame casting a long shadow over his daughter. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough, Layla." The room fell silent instantly. His gaze turned to Amina, who still stood humbly, her hands folded before her apron. "This woman," he declared, his voice booming with authority, "has done what my finest advisors, scholars, and strategists could not. She has displayed intellect, discipline, and strength, qualities worthy of the highest respect." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the hall. "And yet, she came to us as one mocked, insulted, and underestimated. Shame on all who laughed. Shame on my own blood." Layla's lips quivered. "Father." But Zahir's hand shot up, silencing her. His eyes burned with disappointment. "You, my daughter, were born into privilege, taught by the best, and surrounded by luxury. Yet what have you shown tonight? Pride, cruelty, and weakness. You tried to crush another to raise yourself. And now, it is you who stand small." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in agreement. Layla's defiance collapsed under the weight of her father's words. Tears welled in her eyes, but no excuse could save her now. Then, to everyone's shock, Sheikh Zahir descended from his throne and stood beside Amina. With a steady hand, he gestured toward her. "Tonight, let it be known, greatness is not measured by wealth or title, but by wisdom and courage. This maid has proven more noble than the proudest princess." The hall thundered with applause. Some guests even bowed their heads in respect to Amina. Layla, humiliated, could only watch as her father honored the very woman she had tried to disgrace. And for the first time in her life, the princess realized she had lost. The applause roared through the palace like a storm, echoing off the marble walls. Amina stood frozen, her eyes wide, struggling to believe what had just happened. Sheikh Zahir raised his hand, and the hall fell silent again. His deep voice carried the weight of final judgment. From this day forth, Amina will no longer be seen as a servant. She will be honored as the official tutor of this palace, charged with teaching wisdom not only to my daughter, but to all who seek it. The crowd gasped. Some nobles bowed their heads in agreement, while others whispered in awe, A lunch maid, elevated to such a station? Unheard of. Amina's hands trembled. She looked at the sheikh in disbelief. My lord, I am not worthy of such honor. Zahir shook his head firmly. You are more worthy than most who wear crowns. Humility, patience, and wisdom. These are the jewels that shine brighter than gold. His gaze turned, sharp and unyielding, toward Layla. And you, daughter, will sit at her lessons until the day you learn what true nobility means. Wealth can buy tutors, but only humility can make a student. Layla's face burned with shame. She lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. For once there was no retort, no arrogance, only silence. The hall erupted in cheers. Servants clapped. Guards thumped their spears on the floor. Even the scholars, who had once laughed, now bowed toward Amina. Sheikh Zahir raised his arm, his booming words sealing the night. Let it be remembered. Tonight, a maid taught us all that wisdom has no rank, and pride has no crown. Amina stood tall, no longer a shadow in the kitchen, but a light in the palace. And though the necklace around Layla's throat glittered with diamonds, it was clear to everyone watching. It was Amina who wore the true jewel of the night. We live in a world that dazzles us with wealth. Palaces gleam with marble floors, chandeliers drip with gold, and crowns sparkle with diamonds. But none of these things define greatness. They only mask it. Greatness does not sit on a throne. It walks quietly in the footsteps of humility. It is not found in the weight of gold coins, but in the weight of one's character. The story you just witnessed proves that arrogance, no matter how rich or powerful, can collapse in a single moment, while wisdom, even when wrapped in rags, stands tall and unshakable. Think of Amina, mocked, humiliated, treated as less than human because of her station. People saw only her apron, her tray, her lowly position. They thought her life had no value beyond servitude. And yet, when truth demanded a voice, she spoke it. When knowledge required a champion, she rose. When arrogance challenged her, she stood unafraid. That is where true nobility lies, not in being born to riches, but in daring to rise above circumstance. And then, look at Layla, the princess of privilege, born with every door open, every tutor at her feet, every luxury surrounding her. Yet despite all she had, her pride blinded her. She mocked instead of listening, she sneered instead of learning. And in the end, her wealth could not save her from humiliation. Pride is always fragile. It cracks the moment truth presses against it. The sheikh, a man of immense power, could have turned away, preserving his pride, silencing the servant, protecting his daughter. Yet, in acknowledging Amina, he reminded us of something far greater, that true strength lies not in dominance, but in humility. To admit when you are wrong, to honor someone the world deems beneath you. That is the mark of a real leader. And so, this story becomes a mirror for all of us. How often do we look down on others, judging them by their clothes, their jobs, their place in society? How often do we assume wisdom belongs only to those with degrees, crowns, or riches? But life has a way of humbling us. Sometimes the janitor teaches the professor, the maid humbles the princess, the servant carries the wisdom kings forgot. Greatness is not inherited, it is earned, through courage, through patience, through dignity in the face of cruelty. And humility is the crown that never tarnishes. So remember this, respect those around you, no matter their station, because one day the very person you mocked may become the one who saves you, teaches you, or changes your life forever. Wealth fades, crowns rust, pride collapses. But wisdom endures, and it can live in anyone, a king, a servant, a stranger carrying trays through a palace. Never forget, true worth cannot be bought, it must be lived.